And now I'm going to throw a question to the panel here and we'll see where we go. Alex Atwood, I'm going to start with you. The European Union is a leader in environmental protection. How would you ensure that our natural assets are protected?
A whole lot of responses to that.
First, you'll have to be short. Thanks.
Well, the first is that we need to be more challenging when it comes to emissions. As Colin just indicated, all the evidence more and more is about the threat of climate change. There was a report out just this week in America that again put in very stark terms the demands and challenges and risks of climate change. So we need more challenging emissions. Secondly, we need to recognise, especially here in Ireland, given the quality of our wind, wave, tide and light, that renewables is our biggest economic opportunity and our biggest energy opportunity at the same time. So let's scale up our ambition around renewables, given our strategic opportunities, given that we face in to the Atlantic Ocean. Let's ensure that when it comes to the various designations around our habitats, our biodiversity and our lands, that we roll out more ASSIs, that we don't impede or undermine any of the other designations. Let's ensure that when people do compromise those designations, we take decisive action. That's why when I came into DOE, I took decisive action when it came to the damage of the protected species in Strangford Lough, the horse mussel. So let's ensure that, given that we have these designations, that we maintain them, we roll them out, and that where they are damaged, we enforce harsh against those who are responsible.
Okay, Anna Lou, what would you be doing to ensure our natural assets are protected?
Well, if I can give one example.
Just turn the microphone towards you there so that we can hear you. Thank you.
If I can just give one example. As a chair of the Environment Committee, I press NICVA of DOE on a number of occasions about protection for our AONB. That's the area of outstanding beauty, natural beauty. Certainly, the department gave us some maps about our 6 different AONBs, and I asked the question, who is looking after them? From what they gave us initially was only really 3 trusts that look after the AONBs. And I said, what about the others? And particularly Sparran, which is one of the biggest AONBs in Northern Ireland, with no organisation looking after it. And NICVA had about 2 members of staff looking over have an oversight of the whole of Northern Ireland on AONB. So it was really through us asking questions in the committee, particularly me. Now they have set up a trust in Sparran to look after the AONB. So I think we need to look from here, from our own, rather than always looking over to EU. Of course, the EU has a mechanism if we don't look after our natural assets, particularly those ones that have been designated. Okay. Then there will be huge fines for Northern Ireland.
Okay, Mickey Brady, the Sinn Féin MEP Martina Anderson has taken an interest in issues to do with agriculture. How can your party ensure that the Common Agricultural Policy continues to provide sustainable, healthy and safe food?
First of all, I'd apologise excuse me, for Martina not being here. In relation to foreign policy, Sinn Féin are supportive of the need for a common agricultural policy, and we oppose cuts in this area. We do recognise the need for reform, especially regarding the bureaucratic burden, and that the main objective of the common agricultural policy should be food security and ensuring food for the future while supporting our rural communities. We would also state that CAP should not damage agricultural markets in developing countries. But there are other vitally important issues: sustainability, encouraging and rewarding environmentally conscious farming, food labelling decadence of clones and keeping them out of the food chain and keeping Ireland GMO free. So Martina has been very involved in that area, right, and certainly in promoting the whole issue of the rural communities.
Nelson McCausland, is there much meeting of minds between the DUP and Sinn Féin on this?
Well, I think that there's a meeting of minds between many people in regard to...
If you could just move to a microphone.
Sorry.
Thanks very much, Nelson. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a meeting of minds between many different politicians in regard to the importance of the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland. It's around 100,000 jobs there in the agri-food industry and about £5 billion in sales. So clearly it is important, and we think also of its importance in terms of exports, because you're talking there of about £2.6 billion in external sales. So hugely important there. And Diane has been a member of the Agriculture Committee and therefore had an important role in helping to shape policies there that benefit the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland.
Okay, let's go to the Greens now. And Mr Brown, to you.
As you mightn't be surprised, I have an awful lot I could say about this issue.
Well, I'm going to give you very little time to say so.
I mean, I think fundamentally what we have is a model of economic development which isn't working, and business as usual isn't working. And I think that to actually deal with these environmental crises that we're experiencing, we need to radically transform our economy. At the moment, if everybody lived like the average person here, it would take 3 planets to keep us going. So really, this cuts in, it goes into all types of economic decision making, and I don't think that we're doing a very good job here in Northern Ireland. I mean, if you take, for example, the extent of unauthorised quarrying which has taken place, I mean, we have a situation in Lough Neagh where 1 million tonnes of sand and gravel is being extracted without any permissions, and there's been no enforcement. That's about 25%, by the way, of Northern Ireland's consumption, and there's been no enforcement to prevent that. We also had a situation where 60% of our special areas of conservation are in unfavourable condition. So this isn't just about the European regulations not even being strong enough, whether it be the Common Agricultural Policy and the failure there to actually reform that and to make it sustainable, but the fact that we're not taking action to taking enforcement action to actually implement the regulations which are in place.
How vocal is the LC Unionist Party in Europe on issues like the Common Agricultural Policy? Stephen.
Sorry, Jim has been a member of the Agriculture Committee now for 25 years. Jim has been a very key player in terms of all of the CAP reforms. He has been the rapporteur in putting together the dairy package, which follows on from the dairy subsidies, which will shortly come to an end. And he's also the lead rapporteur for the ECR group in terms of the EU-US trade negotiations, which hope to open up new markets, and certainly to deal with many of the issues around opening new markets, especially for agri-food sector.
NI21 is our newest political party in Northern Ireland. This is a steep learning curve for you, Tina McKenzie, is it not?
I would say actually no. I think our politicians need a steep learning curve, Paul. When you're in the real world, and I come from a world of business, but previously I've worked in the voluntary and community sector as well when I first came out of university, and I'm absolutely shocked at the lack of progress within the departments, the lack of cooperation within the departments. And if I were voted to go and represent Northern Ireland in Europe, the one thing I would do as an official opposition is hold the Assembly to account, because I was with the RSPB yesterday, the day before I was with the Ulster Farmers Union, and what I'm hearing as I go around on this journey is that everyone's got the same problem, that the agri-food strategy is sitting up there gathering dust, and it's worth 15,000 jobs to Northern Ireland, whilst we have 1 in 5 of our young people unemployed, and at the same time we've got some of the highest levels of poverty. They are not talking about the real issues, and it's shocking.
I am trying to keep it clear of Stormont, but looking at it in terms of Europe. So if you're elected as an MEP, yeah, what do you do with that mandate in terms of agriculture, yeah, in terms of preparing or protecting our natural resources?
And unfortunately, or fortunately, as an MEP, one of the jobs you have to do is you must hold your local government to account. So when you go to Europe, so for example with the CAP policy, if you look at the difference in what's changing in Europe, so in the 1980s, CAP actually was about 80 to 85% of the actual funding went into farmers. Now, look at us in 2014, that's dropped to 40%. The reason for that is that we've got a knowledge-based economy now in Europe. So what I would do is I would focus our energy on delivering a positive voice to Europe on behalf of Northern Ireland to look at things like Horizon 2020. We're going into Peace 4. It's probably the last time we'll get peace money out of Europe. We need to get more investment. We need a positive voice in Europe, and we need to ensure that Northern Ireland is at the heart of Europe and not on the edge of Europe, to ensure that we get the right investment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious that we must keep moving this morning. We're coming up to 11 o'clock, so I'm going to park that issue for now, and we're going to move on to our next one this morning, which is dealing with rights and equality. And we're going to hear for the next 2 minutes from Patrick Corrigan of Amnesty International. Patrick.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks to NICVA for giving this opportunity. We know that every day MEPs vote on and influence laws and policies that have an impact on human rights and equality, both within Europe and far beyond its borders. But it's our view that the European Parliament must take a much more robust approach if the European Union is to be seen internationally as more credible and effective, both in Europe and on a world stage. I'm just going to highlight a few issues, and I'm going to steer clear of Northern Ireland. Migration and asylum. Every year, thousands of migrants and asylum seekers lose their lives as they try to reach Europe. Maybe they're fleeing persecution or war, maybe they're fleeing chronic poverty, and instead, often they find the end of their lives, or they find themselves in a detention centre. Europe's immigration and asylum policies are far from human rights friendly. Things need to change, and European Union MEPs need to pledge to change the legislation that governs the treatment of asylum seekers and migrants coming into Europe. On the issue of torture, we know that torture is all too real a problem still in the world today. In 2014, the EU torture regulation is due to be reviewed and amended. This is the EU regulation that prohibits and controls the export of equipment used for torture and for capital punishment around the world. But there are loopholes, there are weaknesses, and we want EU candidates for the Parliament to pledge themselves to close the loopholes and strengthen the regulations and stop torture equipment going out of Europe and being used around the world. We all know that natural resources that have fuelled some of the world's most brutal conflicts are traded internationally, including by companies operating within the EU. We need better laws to provide robust oversight of the supply chain and not the half-baked voluntary code of conduct that's currently on the table. So again, we want MEP candidates to pledge themselves to support a new directive to ensure that conflict minerals are kept out of Europe. And finally, 10 years ago, the European Union and Member States introduced the EU guidelines on human rights defenders for use by their diplomatic missions overseas. And this was designed to support and protect human rights defenders, professionals and members of civic society groups, just like the members of NICVA here in Northern Ireland. But we have seen it poorly implemented. We have seen it not followed through in any coherent fashion, and there now needs to be a new approach. So again, we look to MEP candidates to pledge themselves to put human rights at the core of the EU's role overseas, particularly in standing up for human rights defenders, and particularly in this year, we're thinking of women human rights defenders in the likes of Afghanistan. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. I'm going to start with you on this one, Tina McKenzie. Having listened to what Patrick Corrigan has said there, how can you allay any fears that you as an MEP would not be speaking up for women and addressing the issues that he has just told us about?
I think in a couple of ways. First of all, I think a representative who's voted needs to be trusted. And I think the most important thing is for a political representative to be honest. And in situations, that's not always easy for political representatives. And if I look at what's going on in Europe at the moment, I actually think we do have a pretty good, we need to do more, but we do have a pretty good record. So at the moment, we are the biggest donator to World Aid. 0.7% of the budget is going there. I actually would like to see that increase. And then with relation specifically to women's issues, if we look at what's going on around the world, not just in Afghanistan, we need to ensure that women, as you probably know, Patrick, are actually some of the biggest sufferers within war, conflict, and actually need to be the people that are brought in to help rebuild societies. Now, what Europe is doing about that is that they've got new measures, I'm sure you're aware of them, they've got measurements in place at the moment that any aid going out is now reflective on a scale so that women are involved in rebuilding in those conflict societies, ensuring that women are treated right, and ensuring that we're dealing with some of the crimes of war against women that aren't often too dealt with. So I think that Northern Ireland being part of a bigger Europe, we can actually help more with World Aid, and we should increase what we spend on that, and we ensure again that we hold people accountable to that.
Stephen Nicholl.
I think there are a couple of easy issues to address there. I think in terms of the instruments of torture being exported, I think that's one that simply should be, okay, let's ban that. That's something that should be done right away. The issue in conflict minerals, absolutely. There's too many godfathers, criminals, building empires in places like Africa who are being financed through the exploitation of these minerals. And I have to say, sometimes there are international companies who are quite happy to work hand in hand with those people.
So would Jim Nicholson be a lone voice in the European Parliament on this?
I certainly don't think Jim Nicholson will be a lone voice. I think it's a common recognition. I think what's lacking at the minute is a very clear strategic direction which says, OK, we're going to address this issue and we're going to address the companies who at times exploit countries and exploit loopholes in order to do that. I think there needs to be a more strategic approach from Europe in terms of addressing these issues and taking the attitude in terms of, and I know what the amount of aid that is spent, but I think in terms of ensuring that that aid is spent in the right places with the right people at the right time to get the right results. And in terms of helping to address long-term things like migration and asylum, sometimes in terms of economic asylum seekers, I think we need to be looking at building other economies to a level where people actually want to go there and to invest there and to grow those countries and to improve living standards. And that's one of the ways. It's not about building walls around countries to keep people out. It's about building countries that people want to stay in.
Ross Brown.
I think a number of points that were addressed here, and I'm not so proud about how Europe is dealing with these issues. I mean, if we take, for example, the issue of migration in Syria, we have 15,000 people, migrants, refugees, who are allowed in granted asylum in Europe. Comparatively, in Lebanon, there was 1 million refugees, in that relatively poor country. So I think we need to do much more to address these issues and actually have a common policy on migration, but also safe routes for migrants to enter Europe, because as we've seen on the borders of Europe, where there's been awful tragedies when people have been trying to migrate. There's a whole other range of issues. I mean, we would like to, for example, ban the armed drones, which are becoming a major issue for human rights. We would like to ensure that companies are held legally accountable for actions that they take that they take overseas, and we want to see the trade deals of human rights and social environmental standards incorporated into them. And it's actually unfortunate that there has been opportunities to do this in the European Parliament. We had, for example, human rights and social environmental standards and international trade resolution. Unfortunately, Jim Nicholson abstained from that, and Diane Dodds opposed to it. We also had a free trade agreement with Colombia and Peru, and once again we had the instance of Jim Nicholson being opposed to that. And within that free trade agreement, social and environmental standards were being were not protected, essentially.
Okay, how high up the agenda is this on the DUP's radar?
Well, I think that if you look back over the record of Diane in Europe, she's certainly used it as a platform in the European Parliament to raise awareness of a range of human rights issues in many societies around the world. She's fought her corner certainly on issues around religious persecution, also around child exploitation, tackling human trafficking and so on. So they are issues that are very much on her agenda and very dear to her heart.
Mickey Brady.
Yeah, I think first of all you can't have democracy without equality, and I think equality is something that we are constantly campaigning on. In Europe, we have pushed strongly for the adoption of the Equal Treatment Directive to combat discrimination based on religion or belief, disability, age or sexual orientation concerning access to goods and services. Martina is a member of the European Parliament's Disability Intergroup and has met with Irish people living with disabilities as part of the EU Freedom Drive to promote independent living for those with disabilities.
So let me ask you a direct question on that. How would you ensure, Sinn Féin, how would it ensure that the EU disability strategy is implemented fully here?
Well, obviously it is something that Martina is very involved in, and one of the things that Barbara de Bruyn was also involved in was tackling ageism, and Martina is a member of the LGBTI intergroup, the AGE intergroup and the Disability intergroup in European Parliament, so is constantly promoting that all the time as a member of the European Parliament.
Anna Lowe.
Yes, very much. I think I agree with Ross and the Green Party. I think I'm ashamed of what EU, the lack of help given to asylum seekers. I think in the EU we only took in about 2 or 3% of all asylum seekers. The rest of them, the majority of asylum seekers, actually went to neighbouring poor countries rather than to go to the rich countries. And some certainly right-wing governments hyped up a lot of fear and misinformation about asylum seekers. In my office, I deal with asylum seekers all the time, and how we treat them with such lack of compassion is just beyond me. In terms of the EU, under the Lisbon Treaty, the EU committed to integrate development considerations in all their policy developments, all their policy development in developing countries. And I think it is important that it is not just about going in to provide development aid or building roads. It also needs to be looking at countries' human rights records, how they conduct themselves, and about governance issue. I think that's very important if we're going to trade with them and give them aid. And another issue is the UN Security Council Resolution 1325-1325. I set up an all-party group in Northern Ireland. I think that resolution is about peace, security, and women. And I think women, for example, in Northern Ireland had taken a huge part in keeping peace in Northern Ireland. But they also need to be there to shape the future of government after conflict situation.
Okay, and just before it disappears from the screen, I'm looking at a tweet there, Alex. Clear direction lacking in Europe on addressing human rights issues. How would the SDLP address that?
So, Patrick, I think that when you stand back from this election, we are at a pivotal moment, both in the history of this part of the world and in terms of Europe. We, over the last number of years, the right and centre-right have held sway in Europe. And that has worked itself through in many, many ways, both in terms of austerity on the one hand and denial of rights on the other. So the pivotal moment in Europe is that on the far side of 22nd of May, the Socialist group can be the biggest group in the European Parliament, with up to 30% of the members. And at that moment, you can pivot Europe to deal more fully with the issues of migration, asylum, torture, conflict minerals, and EU human rights guidelines. So if we grasp this opportunity in Europe, then I think we can pivot to a rights-based approach. And it's the same here in the North. That hope and ambition that we had about the institutional structures and strategic direction of 1998, a Human Rights Commission, an Equality Commission, commissions on policing and criminal justice, that has all been squandered in recent years. So here we now have this opportunity to pivot as well. But as we pivot within Europe and within the North, let's also remember obligations internationally. And this was touched upon by Tina. As we speak, every minute a woman becomes HIV positive around the world. As we speak, the biggest cause of death of adolescent girls is pregnancy or childbirth. Not poverty, not conflict in the world, but the consequences of being pregnant and the consequences of childbirth. So if we are going to pivot in terms of the character of Europe and the character of the North, let's also pivot in terms of obligations to those who are in even more desperate circumstances than we are here.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, panel. I want to move on now to our next topic, and that is to do with employment. Let's just say we have a fluid situation emerging here. So who's going to come up first? And would you identify yourself? And I understand that we have some young people here as well who want to raise points. So do come to the lectern here. Paint the picture and let's see what we can do.
Hello, I'm Jan Cole. And
Would you just speak into the microphone there? Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
Rookies. I'm Jan Cole and I'm the Youth Participation Worker with the NEAT Youth Forum. The NEAT Forum itself is a group of over 70 voluntary and community sector organisations that are working with NEAT young people across Northern Ireland. The NEAT Youth Forum itself is a collaboration innovation fund project funded through DAEA. It's Northern Ireland-wide itself, and it's focused on NEAT's issues for those who are not in education, employment and training, and ensuring that the voice of young people is heard and is central to the development and the review of policy and provision for those young people, in particular the Pathways to Success strategy. The NEAT Youth Forum has developed 5 regional hubs across Northern Ireland, from which young people can get involved, explore the issues relating to NEAT's young people, build on their capacity and engage with the system that makes decisions about their future. We believe that young people are the experienced experts in this and that they're best placed to speak on NEAT's issues and inform on policy and development. I'm going to hand over to Aaron now.
Hi, my name is Aaron McCormick. I'm actually one of the NEATs, part of the youth programme. And right now there's over 22% of youth unemployment. And given the competition and the economy, how will you create jobs for young people to support them and maintaining them?
Okay, that's your question. How do you create jobs? No easy answer to that one, is there? How would you, what advice would you, as somebody who's on the receiving end here, what advice would you be giving to our MEPs?
Well,
just go ahead.
My current situation is I've actually finished a placement, and they have said that I can stay on, but they don't have the funds to keep me on. And it's really annoying where people are saying, get jobs, and the company doesn't have the money to keep me on.
Okay, so the question that you want to ask our panel:
how are you going to fund them jobs?
How can we fund jobs? How can we? Right. We're supposed to be looking for a utopia here because we live in the real world and money is tight, and you're depending on an encouraging, I suppose, a market. So, Alex, can I start with you?
Yes. Well, first of all, I can agree with what you just said, that the voices of experience around all this are the young people. I remember a meeting of the Dell Committee in 2009, that's why you're laughing, when young people came in and spoke from Include Youth and spoke about, Anna was there, I remember the day very well, it was early 2009 if I'm right. So you are absolutely right in that regard. So how do we do that? First of all, where are the big employment opportunities for Northern Ireland now? Not in 10 years or 20 years, we have to plan for that, but now. One, around tourism and heritage-led development. We can grow, on this day of all days, we can grow with your tie of all ties. We can grow our tourism by 100% within 10 years to £1 billion a year industry with all the jobs that come out of that. So heritage-led development and tourism is a driver for employment. Secondly, agri-food. We are not punching to our weight when it comes to agri-food because the quality of our food is the best in the world, because there's very few pasture-based food systems in the world, unlike here in Ireland. And the opportunities there for value-added and jobs are great. And three, and I'll finish here.
Okay, but I want to push you on the point. Okay, the point is, how do you create employment opportunities for people like Aaron?
But that's the point I'm making. Tourism and heritage-led development is a huge opportunity, not in 10 years, but here and now. Agri-food is a huge opportunity, not in 10 years, but in the here and now. And thirdly, you invest in the university and the college sector in those skills that are going to position Northern Ireland as a competitor in the global market. And more than anything else, that's IT. Okay. So we need a strategy that invests in those sectors in order to create the job opportunities that are... There's low-hanging fruit out there. There's just a lack of ministers with the political will and understanding of power to drive it in that direction.
Okay, and are people like Aaron, are they getting the right advice when they're at school?
If I may just mention my colleague Stephen Farry, he's reviewing the career advice in schools. That's very important. But again, I think what needs a problem is lack of qualifications, lack of training opportunities. And again, Stephen Farry is making great progress reforming the apprenticeship and youth training at the moment, and he's widening opportunities for apprenticeships and from kind of maybe lower grade qualifications up to really top level NVQ for a university level. So he is opening up for young people to get into jobs, to get apprenticeship. I think that's very important, really upskilling our workforce. Then from there, we can create more jobs. We can attract people coming to Northern Ireland, because a lot of investors coming here, they're not just looking at Northern Ireland, a beautiful place with lots of grants, but also our labour skills and how it would match with their demands.
Aaron, if it's not an embarrassing question to you, when you left school, what qualifications, what grades did you have?
I had 1 GCSE.
1 GCSE.
But I went on and repeated in Tech and St Patrick, and now I have 7.
Now you've got 7.
Very
But
good.
whenever you left school at first, you had 1 GCSE, right? Mickey Brady, that's a crime.
Absolutely, and unemployment continues to be a huge problem. Unemployment among youth, particularly both north and south, unfortunately is on the increase. In terms of trying to tackle that problem, we have pushed strongly for a genuine and credible youth guarantee scheme to tackle the youth unemployment crisis. And that would be based on the funding model outlined by the International Labour Organisation and the National Youth Council of Ireland. Approximately 21 billion would be required. And we have been alone among Irish parties in proposing and actively supporting that, because a lot of the measures that the EU have put forward to help those out of work have really been tokenistic. There haven't been genuine attempts at solving that problem. And we would argue that the EU should support the introduction of social clauses in public and private contracts targeting the unemployed and those who have recently completed education and training.
Right.
But the lack of education qualifications, and I think there have been numerous debates in the Assembly about this, continues to be a huge problem.
Nelson McCausland, in your experience, is Aaron the exception rather than the rule, leaving with 1 GCSE, but then taking the courage to get 6 more?
Well, sadly, there are many young folk who leave school with a limited number of qualifications. Thankfully, there are those like Aaron who go on to achieve others, but we need to see a lot more move in that direction. I think there's 2 elements to the question and the answer. First of all, there's a need to create employment, and Alex is right, there are things where we have good opportunities here around tourism and heritage, and many of those jobs do not require, or some of those jobs do not require, the higher level of academic qualification. Agri-food's another one that would fall into that category. We are bringing jobs to Northern Ireland, 400 new jobs there coming to Capita and Newtown. The problem is many of those jobs are not going to people from more disadvantaged communities. 190 or somewhere between 100 and 200 jobs were lost there, or are being lost at Teletech next door, and I think there are only about 5 people who live in North Belfast who actually work in there. 5 local people. The jobs were brought, but they didn't actually go to benefit local people. So the issues around bringing more jobs hopefully that have a range of skill requirements and education requirements, and then supporting those who have had a bad experience of education to get the skills that they need.
Aaron, what would you like to be doing? Where would you like to be working? What kind of a job would you like to have?
Doing nothing, being rich.
Doing nothing.
I don't know.
All right, okay. Doing nothing and being rich. Okay. Ross Bryan, how do you react to that?
I think we'd all like to do nothing and be rich. But in terms of how to create jobs, I mean, the issue of the youth guarantee that the European Parliament introduced was a Green Party initiative. I'm pleased to say that. Unfortunately, Northern Ireland lost out to the funding that was available within the social budget because it was actually cut by the European Parliament. We had 25% youth unemployment. You needed 25%. We had 23%. You need 25% to qualify for that funding. So, unfortunately, as I say, that there was a decision to cut the social budget. But if I can just say, and I echo what McGee's just said, because I agree with everything he said, but as well, I think that the problem that we have is a real lack of jobs, and insofar as what we have done is impose collective austerity, and as a consequence, we're in the midst of a lost decade, and I think that has been the fundamental failure of our economic policy, and until we start to reverse that, then we're not going to get out of this mess, and I think that's crucial. Right. And as I say, the whole point of it was to reduce debt, but the real issue is that imposing this collective austerity has been the equivalent, the reduced debt has been the equivalent of trying to dig ourselves out of a hole.
Okay, apart from being fabulously rich, Aaron, and doing nothing, what else would you like to do?
Working in digital media.
Working?
In digital media.
In digital media,
Yeah.
okay? Working in digital media, there are a lot of people who want to do that. How can the Ulster Unionist MEP help people like Aaron achieve that dream?
Well, I think there's certainly the investment from Europe in terms of the creative industries, in terms of all of that development. But I think one of the things that we need to address in terms of NEETs is we can't look at it as simply a problem for a certain cohort of young people here at this time. We need to look at a whole system approach. This starts with the parents in the home, with the young child going to nursery school, and working on building up their capacity to encourage the child to go through school, to learn, to come out the other end with formal qualifications which help them to grow on.
Okay, just let me stop you there. What kind of encouragement, Aaron, did you get whenever you were at school?
Not much,
from
really.
home?
I was during the end of school, close to the end, they were sending me step it up, whatever, but then whenever I didn't, they didn't really do much, kind of just set me on the way.
Okay.
And I was really my mum actually encouraged me to go on.
Right, so there wasn't an awful lot of encouragement there. So you're
And it's
battling
not-
against that?
Absolutely, and it's not about blaming people. It's about the culture that has developed in Northern Ireland and many of our communities where we don't value education to the point where, and I'm going to steal Tina's term here, to aspire to better. And I think that's something that.
So does that mean we know where you're putting your number one in the European election? So it rolled off the tongue there too easily, didn't it?
Definitely. Well, they're using it so much, even on the ballot papers, so that's why it's getting out there.
21st century politics, my friend.
So, I mean, it is something where it's not just about, and we all know the problems in coming in here with a programme which will last 3 years or 5 years, and we do a very good initiative for that period of time that's funded through the community and voluntary sector. And it doesn't matter how well a programme works, but at the end of 3 or 5 years, the money's gone. Mm-hmm. And the initiative it might have developed great progress, but there's nothing left to pick it up.
Yeah, and
so we can't deal with issues like this on the basis of we'll get a grant every now and again to deal with an issue.
And
we need to change the system.
And that's the point that Aaron makes. His employer would like to keep him on, but he hasn't got the money.
Absolutely, and as someone from, again, I've worked in employment right across Europe for the last number of years, don't get someone without the skills to do the job. And what I say is, first of all, a big compliment to the voluntary and community sector here, who have given the most support, I think, to those people who are furthest from the labour market. So well done to all of you, first and foremost. Secondly, the government, this five-party executive, have not got the focus nor the will to sort this problem out. Stephen Farry is doing too little, too late, and it's a shame. And in 20 years' time, when we look back, we'll look back on this government and we will say, what did they do for our young people, a lost generation, especially for people like Aaron. Now, when I was at Aaron's age, growing up in West Belfast, we could at least turn around and say, well, actually, we're from a troubled area. You know, unemployment was rife, generational unemployment was rife. But for children today, post-conflict, what are we doing for them? And the fact that Aaron wants to work within a digital environment, well, that's exactly what's happening in Europe. And just to give you a couple of statistics, in Northern Ireland, Wayfield of FP7, €55 per head, versus the Republic of Ireland, €550 per head. We're not doing a good job at attacking that investment and getting it into Northern Ireland. Secondly, Invest NI are doing a good job at getting in foreign direct investment, as you've heard the DUP continually go on about the jobs coming in. But what we're not doing is 99% of companies across the island of Ireland have got less than 50 employees. We're not helping our SMEs avail of support through Europe. We've got to help those SMEs so they can help people like Aaron get started with innovation, get started with entrepreneurship, and we've got to start early, and that's why NI21 wants a pupil premium in the schools to ensure that from year 1 to year 3 that we can actually help kids that are the most disadvantaged and in poverty to get on the right tracks.
All right, Tina, thank you. Aaron, I'm going to throw this back to you. You've heard our candidates and their representatives. What do you think of what you heard?
Don't know.
Well, I mean, you know, I think you should be entirely honest here, because we're saying the right things, we're trying to get the right message out there, but at the end of the day, you still don't have a job.
I know. Disappointed, really. But
Okay. But what are the prospects for you right now as we stand here on this Friday?
not many.
You're drawing the brew, are you?
Yeah.
You're unemployed. And what age are you?
20.
You're 20. Okay.
Paul, may I just
Well, just before you do, what are you going to do on the 22nd of May?
Vote.
You are going to vote.
Yeah.
Good. You're determined to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you how you're going to vote, but you are determined to vote. Do you think that vote will make any difference?
I will, yeah. Hopefully.
You believe that vote will make a difference? Okay. Well, I agree with you, Alex. I speak as somebody who, from the age of 18, I've never missed voting myself, and I've never felt that any vote has been wasted. So thank you. Sorry, Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, just a call to Aaron there. And to all of the people in Northern Ireland who are either 1 in 4 economically inactive and those unemployed, and especially the young unemployed, I call to you to look to local councils, stand up in your area, get yourself 700 to 1,000 people to sign a form. You will get a job to be a local councillor. You get £14,000 a year, because most local councillors in Northern Ireland are going to fail of a job for £14,000 whilst maintaining their own full-time job. Yet we've kids like Aaron who are equally as valuable and have got equally as much to give. They should get involved in politics, become local councillors and get a job.
Great. Okay, thank you. I know you want to respond, Anna, to...
Yeah.
You want to respond to something that Tina had said earlier. Can I ask you to be brief so that we can keep the time here?
I utterly object to Tina saying Stephen Farry has done too little, too late. Stephen Farry is one of the most productive ministers in the executive. He has produced a needs strategy, a higher education strategy, a review of teacher training, career advice review.
And how's that? But how is that affecting Aaron?
And apprenticeship, he's opened up apprenticeship, he has frozen tuition fees, he has given more STEM places in schools, PhD places rise from 30 to 150 and going on to 300 places. So don't tell me that Stephen Farry hasn't done enough. In fact, her party leader, Basil McRae, was the Dow committee chair, and he had done absolutely nothing.
We aren't going to get this sorted now, and I'm not going to allow this break. But if you two would like to fight it out later on, that'd be great. We'll all watch. But thank you for now. Can I ask you, Aaron, what would be the message that you would leave right now to the panel here? What is it you want to say to them from your heart?
Give people a chance to actually do placements and actually get something at the end of it, and not just get held along and then just waste their time and the employer's time. Yeah.
Okay, Aaron, thank you very much indeed. Your appreciation, please. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. We're now moving on to the issue of migration. So, Christine Borland. Where's Christine? Hi, Christine. Thank you very much indeed. The Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities. Christine, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Migration, both in and out of Northern Ireland, plays an important role in enriching our society and those abroad. Whilst it's easy to hear figures over 4 million foreign workers now taking up employment in the United Kingdom, we should bear in mind the opportunities that EU membership brings for people here to work elsewhere. Migrants bring with them new and different skills as well as energy and innovation, which should be welcomed. At least about 1 in 5 migrants have entrepreneurial skills with the capacity of job creation to support the infrastructure locally. However, it is also important that we do not just focus on work. Migration diversifies our country in many ways, particularly enhancing integration and cultural cohesion in shared spaces. You just have to look at the success of multicultural events held here in Belfast and across Northern Ireland throughout the year. I'm interested to hear what our candidates have to say about migration throughout the European Union. Thank you.
Okay, but before I let you go, Christine, do you mind? Thank you. What do you think about our view to migration into Northern Ireland? And how welcome do we make people feel, the people that you represent in the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities?
Well, I've been in Northern Ireland for 20 years. I feel quite accepted in Northern Ireland, and I've managed to integrate well with society over here. But I think in lieu of what I've heard in the news recently and all, there needs to be a lot of work done at the cohesion level.
What do you think we need to do here in order to make people, maybe your experience was different, but I think of the new Europeans, the people from Eastern Europe who are making their homes here?
I think we need to be more tolerant and accepting of the new Europeans and new migrants who've come into the country, because they support the social economy, and we need policies in place where we can encourage and enhance those relations.
Thank you. Do you mind just... Well, you can sit down, because you're going to hear now the response to that. Nelson McCausland, can I come to you? In a society that is so sectarian, does it surprise you that we're as racist as we are?
Well, it's been interesting for me over the last number of weeks out canvassing, because one of the candidates that I go around canvassing with has married to a girl who was born in China. So the issue of migration, immigration and different communities coming into Northern Ireland is one that he's very conscious of. I think that we are a society that has had an experience of sectarianism in the past, no doubt about that. We're a society also, we're not much different from what happens in other parts of the British Isles. There is racism also in parts of England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic, so we're not unique in that regard. And it's something that I deplore. Everyone is a human being. People should be treated respectfully and equally and fairly. And the sort of violence that we see from time to time against people from different communities that have come here is totally wrong. But I think an education certainly has a role to play in that. The sort of thing that that Christine was talking about there in terms of multicultural events, again, where people have experience of other cultures and traditions, again, I think that's very valuable, because quite often people are fearful of the unknown. The more we know of each other, the better.
Why is it that whenever we cover a story on the news, whether it's an attack against a family from Poland or an attack against a family from an African country, why invariably does it seem to happen in a loyalist area?
Interestingly enough, there are 2 points, I suppose, there. There are instances where it does happen in nationalist areas as well, and
yes,
we've seen that here in North Belfast, where there have been instances in both unionist and nationalist areas. It's not unique to one community or the other, and sometimes there's a sense, I think, almost of demonising a community as being the
and I'm deliberately not
culprit,
doing
and
that.
And I appreciate that totally, Paul. But the fact is that there are certain communities which have been allowed over the years to decline very considerably in our city communities, particularly in unionist areas. They tend to be...
You're not saying that excuses what happens.
No. I'm just saying. I'm coming to the point. Having been allowed to decline, there is a greater access of accommodation, therefore, and therefore, quite often in some of those areas, you see substantial numbers of people from different outside communities coming into Northern Ireland and congregating there. Doesn't excuse it at all. Absolutely not.
You're the housing minister. I'm trying not to get it too local here.
No. I'll respond to that. But I think that's why it's much easier maybe to get a house in one area than another, and therefore people tend to congregate in or come together in those areas.
All right.
The issue about housing, I'm responsible for that and for regeneration.
Okay, Mickey Brady, can I just ask for a response to you? I mean, we are a sectarian society here. Does it surprise you that we extend beyond that at times and become racist?
Not in the least, Paul, because as a Sinn Féin member of the Assembly, there are actually some Assembly members, not very many, it has to be said, who will not actually talk to me because of my political beliefs and because of who I am. So at that level, that needs to be addressed. And, you know, it's rich.
Just before you do, can you and Nelson have a conversation?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Right, okay.
No, I mean, no, there are, as I said, not many, but a few who will not actually engage in conversation, wouldn't even pass the time of day with you. And I feel that that's it's probably harder not to talk to somebody than actually to talk to them, but that's an issue that we need to address. So for us to criticise other people sometimes seems a bit rich, because it is an endemic problem in our society, and it's not that sectarianism was a problem. It continues, unfortunately, to be a problem. What I do find heartwarming is going around canvassing at the moment, because in my own constituency and in the new area there are a number of immigrants, and the vast majority that we've spoken to are happy. They're well settled in the community. They're accepted very much as part of the local community. They contribute greatly to the diversity in the local community, and I think that has to be welcomed and recognised.
Anna, you and I go back a long time. We worked together in the 1970s in the BBC. How much of what Christine had to say chimes with you?
In terms of
welcome that you've been made feel, and are you a separated person?
Well, from my own experience, certainly I haven't seen too many incidents against myself. I'd been kicked on the street on one occasion.
Why were you kicked?
I asked you, simply because my face did not fit. So I was kicked by a group of young
Was this
people.
long ago?
When I was working in the BBC.
Okay.
So that was a long time ago. I just arrived, actually not long after I arrived, going home from the BBC down Bedford Street, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, going to get my bus. So certainly, but I don't want to talk about myself, but in terms of the recent dramatic increase in racist crime, I think it is very worrying, very, very worrying indeed. I think the recent figures published just a couple of days ago, we saw something like 73% increase in the last few months of racist incidents compared to last year. And whilst Nelson may be right in saying you see in those areas where there are more places for short-term renting and that's where migrant workers go in, it may be true in South Belfast, but certainly not in East Belfast. A lot of the Polish, or some of the Polish families who have been attacked actually have bought their own homes. So they are not rented accommodation. And I believe, and the police certainly said that, and there's the UVF coming out to attack them. And there is an element of...
To be fair, I have to say that they haven't produced evidence of that. They've said it, but they haven't produced the evidence.
But I think that the Polish community, actually, I feel, that get the double whammy, because they are seen as being from the Catholic side, or Catholic faith. And so a sectarianism plus racism against them. And I think that's something we need to stop. I had a number of conversations with the police recently, and they have now established a task force in PSNI to tackle this issue. And as the chair of the Environment Committee, I've called on them next week to come to talk to
paraphrase
us.
Tina McKenzie, maybe too little, too late?
Yeah. Yes, you can say that, but I also think it is not just down to the police to do it. We have politicians who have maybe never condemned, or parties never condemned an incident in their area, and staying very quiet, not coming out to condemn it, is quietly supporting the local incidents.
Oh, okay. Alex Abbott, you certainly aren't one of those representatives who has not come out and said something about racism or sectarianism.
No, but like I think what Christine said it all. I think she acknowledged that there is still work to be done. That's clear, given the evidence of recent days and weeks. But people in the north, despite our history and despite where we come from, I think by and large people in the north are tolerant and a selfless people. And I think we need to recognise that. I also think it's...
doesn't sound like that all the time, particularly in Stormont.
Yes, I agree. but I talked about the people most of the time.
I'm talking about people too. I'm not making any difference between a person and an MLA.
Yeah, sometimes the politicians play to audiences, and they should stop doing that. And we've seen evidence of that over the last number of days, even over the last day or two. So people should stop playing to their audiences for sectional or narrow interests. But the people across the north, I've been working now in this campaign for the last 3 months. I've gone to every town and townland. And what do I find? Good and decent people everywhere, working hard on behalf of their families and their communities and their businesses and their farms. So I have great confidence in our people, because our people have always demonstrated that when there's difficulties, they can often measure up. When it comes to this issue of immigrants, like people in this room were probably immigrants at one time or another. They were a stranger in another land, or they were an immigrant. And when we deny the stranger or the immigrant in our own land, we actually deny ourselves, because it is part of the experience of this people in this part of the world that we travel to other places for a reason. Can I agree with one thing, though? Our society tells us one thing over the last 30 or 40 years. When it comes to bad practice, be it on housing or employment or sectarianism or racism, what you have to do is come down like a ton of bricks on it, because you can educate and you convince and persuade people, but those who are doing their worst have to experience the harsh consequences of that through penalty and punishment.
All right. Okay. Ross Brown, where do the Greens in Europe stand on migration?
Well, just say a few things about locally and then touch on Europe. And really, I think I'm really ashamed about what's going on locally with the intolerance and the racism and even just going around and knocking on doors. This has been an issue that has been raised nearly more than any other this year.
What are people saying to you?
Well, just the general intolerance towards migrants and immigration in general.
And who are these people? Are they people of any particular religion?
Ordinary punters, ordinary people, and I don't know what religion people are, but I think that the issue
are they in loyalist or nationalist areas then?
Well, I would be out canvassing in both different areas. So,
so is this a picture right across the board? As far as you're concerned?
I think it'd be wrong to isolate different communities and to say. But one thing I can say is that where the general levels of intolerance are the highest is the most deprived and insecure areas. And I think that Nelson McCausland is right when he says that insecurity is related to intolerance. But one thing I would say there is, well, who is to blame for the fact that areas have become so deprived since 1998? We've had our own assembly. But the one thing I want to tackle here is the myths of migration. And this is the big one, because what we're hearing time and time again is all the UKIP rhetoric, and they're not here today to defend themselves, but it's disgraceful, really. And it's been embedded in people's psyche that migrants are coming here to claim benefits, when actually they contribute more. EU migrants contribute more than they take out in benefits, and they're actually responsible for 1 in 7 new businesses that are actually started up. So they're actually creating jobs for people. But then also think about Northern Ireland. Are this anywhere on these islands? And we have a history of emigration, particularly here. For the last 30 years, people have left here because of the Troubles, and other people are in a similar situation to what people were here in the past, and they want to escape persecution. 40 million people are displaced in the world, and we need to resettle 200,000 refugees every year. And yet the EU only accepts in 4,500, compared to America, where there's 80,000 people are resettled in America every year.
So the Green voice in Europe isn't being listened to, is it?
Well, it's not, because we are actually pushing for.
So why should we vote Green then?
We're pushing for example, the border agency Frontex. We think it's the wrong agent, the wrong agent to deal with this. We want to get rid of the current rules, which are called the Dublin regulations, that force migrants to apply for asylum in the first country that they come to. We think there should be a coordinated approach at the European level. We need coordination of the rescues at seas. We've seen how many tragedies have we experienced on Europe's borders and the oceans. There's so much more that we need to do humanitarianly. Okay. And then just the last thing I want to say is I'm really. Yeah, I mean, I'll actually leave it there.
Okay, that's fine. I'll let you leave it there too. Okay, Tina, this is the first election that NI21 has fought. So, what are people on the doorstep saying to you about their new neighbours from Europe or from other parts of the world?
Actually, to be honest, I haven't heard a lot. I mean, in certain areas, so for example, in parts of East Belfast and in parts of South Belfast, we've heard a little bit, but not enough. It's as if it's happening and not enough people really recognise it's happening.
So it's not an issue, is that what you're saying?
I think it is, isn't it? No, it's a huge issue, obviously. I think people traditionally in Northern Ireland vote in particular ways. They don't expect their politicians to come out and be leaders in issues like this. At the moment, I think we've got, and Anna her party is pushing for the Equality Act and pushing the race relations legislation up in Stormont. And what I would say to those parties like the UUP, the SDLP and Alliance, do you know what, guys? You're not getting anywhere with Sinn Féin and the DUP. They bang everything around. They will use everything as a political football. Get out, become an opposition and push things like the Race Relations Act, and let's get some action going. You know, we need to have an opposition that is effective in Northern Ireland. Even for the group of people in this room, what I say is, you all know it's so very difficult to go on the one hand to government and say, you know, we need some funding for our projects, but then you also want to be the voice of society to also criticise and say this is what's happening out there. So sometimes we're stuck in a dichotomy with that.
All right, I'll give the DUP and Sinn Féin an opportunity to respond at the moment, but I just want to go to you, Stephen. Stephen, is the Ulster Unionist Party in Europe still sitting with the Conservative bloc?
We're still sitting with the ECR, yes.
Yes, right.
Yes.
So in that case, you're part of a bigger European voice in this. So what is the view of the party within that group on migration and dealing with issues like that?
Well, let's certainly in terms of the need to look at the economic migration and ensuring, for example, that Northern Ireland has massive opportunities. Not only that, we have massive need for migrants to come to Northern Ireland to fill important places within our society. I want to take us back to a very local issue in terms of a place like East Belfast, where a lot of these attacks are happening.
What about places like Ballymena, where you're from? Or where
Well, I'll give you an example. I not only step in for Jim Nicholson on occasions, I also step in for Santa at Christmas time in Randallstown. And I would do, you know, there would be, switching on Christmas lights, and we would have maybe 1,000 children who would come through Santa's grotto to see Santa. And 10 to 15% of the children coming through are not from here. They're people who have moved here. They're people who are part of the community. They're people who don't have there aren't records of significant attacks. They are fully integrated into the community and play a full role in it. But I want to focus on East Belfast, where a lot of these issues are happening. And they happen in the shadow of the two big yellow cranes from Harland and Wolff. And neither Harland nor Wolff are Ulster Scots or Irish names. And that's what we should be telling people, is the history of migration into Northern Ireland. It's about people coming here and creating opportunities. And the people who are attacking people from other community or from other countries who have come here to live, they're attacking their own opportunities. Think about it, if we actually engaged with people from the Polish community and looked for them to work with us to open new markets in Poland for new products, where we should actually be creating jobs here to export to Poland. So there's a massive education process to be undertaken. But the simplest sign of what people should look at is, look at those yellow cranes, look at what they brought to Northern Ireland, and think of what the people you're attacking are bringing to Northern Ireland, which is opportunity, and you're only hurting yourself.
How many generations back would you have to go to find that you were of immigrant stock?
It would have to be quite a part, but I wouldn't consider myself an immigrant. However,
to the extent that, I mean, for example, I'm happy to say my mother's from the south of Ireland, right? My great-grandfather was a Scotsman. So, hey, there's a sense in which I come from outside.
And possibly, but let me give you an example. A number of years ago, I went to live in Toronto. So I was an immigrant.
Right.
I went to live there. And I went to live in a community that was predominantly an ethnic community. It was a community where my skin colour was not the same as the most of the people. And I would say 99% of the people were absolutely fantastic. We worked with them. We worked in the health sector. Toronto's the most multicultural city you could probably find. But there was 1%. There was 1% who took issue with the colour of my skin. And having come from Northern Ireland and known about sectarianism and the background to that, and back in the 1990s, race wasn't the big issue. Being the subject of racist abuse is probably one of the most frightening things that can happen to you. Okay. Because there's nowhere to hide. In Northern Ireland, if it's sectarianism, you don't wear your religion on your sleeve, but you can't change the colour of your skin. And I have to say, racism is one of the most frightening things to be subjected to. And I think in terms of how the police and society and courts address it, they must take it and deal with it with the seriousness it deserves. And that means people who are guilty of it need to do time. Okay. It can't be a slap on the wrist.
Paul, could I just make one very quick comment?
Well, before you do, I did want to give the DUP and Sinn Féin an opportunity to respond to what Tina was saying. Mickey, you'll have heard that. So what's your response? Is it a carve-up between yourselves and the DUP?
This is one of these throwaway lines, I have to say.
Well, then tell us the truth.
I don't think it is a carve-up. I think that we are two parties who are diametrically politically opposed, but I sit in committees with DUP MLAs, both in the Health and DSD committee, and what I do find, and people may be surprised at this, that there is a great degree of consensus. We listen to the same rhetoric from Basil McRae, from John McAllister, from Jim Allister about this opposition. And, you know,
why are we not seeing the results then of this cooperation between yourselves and the DUP more than we do?
Well, I think there is, again, I think there's a media aspect to it.
Oh, Mickey, come on, you're blaming us now.
No, I'm not blaming you, but I do think, and I've spoken to media people when I first went to Stormont, because it seems some of them are moping about actually waiting on something terrible to happen. I mean, I would love to meet somebody who is fairly objective about it all. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case yet.
I'm here.
Yes, well, maybe some exceptions. The other thing I would say, I mean, Nelson and I do have conversations regularly, but unfortunately, most of them are about welfare reform. But apart from that,
there's not much of a meeting of minds on that, is there?
Tina made a point there about, the voluntary sector not being able to do their job because in terms of lobbying. As someone who worked in the voluntary sector for 30 years and had the support of all political parties at local level, certainly, I do not necessarily agree with that, because I think the voluntary sector plays such a huge and important role in our society.
Yep.
And I think they are absolutely free to lobby, and we meet voluntary groups both on a personal level and on a party level on a very, very regular basis.
All right.
Make that point.
Okay, so perception here, is it all wrong then, Nelson?
I think there is a very inaccurate perception.
Well, then put us right. Put us right then.
Yeah. Over the period of this Assembly, I think there have been quite a number of measures that have been introduced, and I'm just thinking particularly of my own department, which have been...
But convince the likes of Tina there.
Well, sometimes people may not want to be convinced.
I think we're all grown up here. Now, no. She's a reasonable lady. You're a reasonable man.
Thank you for that. Now, there are a number of issues there that we brought through in terms of improving the situation of private tenants in the private rented sector. We brought the first housing strategy for Northern Ireland ever. We're looking at improving the quality of our social housing stock in a whole range of ways. So the whole series of things that I could look at, whether it be urban regeneration and so on, there has been delivery.
So are we not doing our job in the media? I think that's a yes.
To go down of criticising everyone in the media, and certainly will accept yourself, Paul, in that regard.
Right.
But I think, yes, sometimes it is the case. If you look at newspapers generally across the UK, the fact is bad news makes bigger headlines.
Yes.
I'll give you a simple example. We spent about £200,000 or so on improving shop fronts in town centres, which were empty shops, and it suddenly became a headline in a newspaper that about £6 million had been poured down there. They got the wrong amount of money. They didn't understand the thing. I saw an editorial in a newspaper the other day that claimed that welfare reform was a reserved matter. No, it's a devolved matter. That's the issue. Sometimes there isn't the level of understanding that there should be.
Actually, maybe it should be a reserved matter rather than a
might
devolved
make my
matter
life simpler, I'll tell you that.
But anyway,
it might be as good for Northern Ireland.
I do want to move on. Alex, you want the quick words?
Two very quick words.
Right, okay.
I think people across Northern Ireland, they value devolution, even though it's very flawed, and we know that. Mm-hmm. They value the United Stand Against Terror because we never had it for 40 or 50 years. They value a new beginning to policing. But universally across the north at the moment, there is a feeling that I've been let down. And I think anybody who's in denial of that is denying the truth of where people are. Could I just make one other point? You said that you came from your mother came
from the south. My mother's from the south, my great-grandfather from Scotland.
I think one of the great liberations of this time, despite all the bad news in the headlines, is that we are beginning to explore how each of us came to be here. Mm-hmm. Like my parents, Paul knows this, but my parents are both Cork City born and bred. Nothing to do with the north. My grandfather Atwood was an English Protestant from Northampton who went to Cork to make shoes in the early part of the last century. And his brother died in the First World War and is in an unmarked grave on the Belgian coast at Newport. And I bear his name.
That's ecumenical.
So my identity, I'm still proud to be Irish and very much of this island, but I more and more value and recognise those influences upon me, not least the fact that I bear the name of somebody who died in the First World War.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Alex, given the centenary of that commemoration. It's just coming up to 12 o'clock now. We're going to move on to poverty and inclusion. Mary Kavanagh has been sitting patiently waiting. Marie is the director of Gingerbread in Northern Ireland. So I'll let you put out your stall here.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. And I've been asked to make a 2-minute contribution on poverty and inclusion, and I can assure you that is an extremely difficult thing to do, given the current situation. going to start off. Poverty and social inclusion is a significant issue at a European level, and that's been reflected in directives, particularly around funding directives that have been made by the Commission in more recent years. And I would have to say that over the last number of years, we here in Northern Ireland have seen a plethora of strategies developed to address poverty and inclusion. To name but a few, the anti-poverty strategy, the child poverty strategy, numerous inclusion strategies and reports around homelessness, lone parents, health and disability, etc. I could go on forever, but I won't. And yet, poverty remains a feature of life for a variety of groups within our community. In 2010-11, over 350,000 people were found to be living in relative poverty in Northern Ireland, and over 230,000 of them in what is classed as absolute poverty. The largest group of people categorised as being of working age poverty are those who are without a job, and I know we've spent some time a minute or two ago looking at employment. Northern Ireland has also been severely impacted on by the global economic downturn, with concerns that any recovery that's being made, particularly in through our neighbour in Britain, is not likely to impact here very significantly for a long time. We also have significant structural challenges which hamper economic performance, and our living standards fall well below certainly those in Britain. We have lower levels of employment and productivity, we have lower average wage levels, we have an over-reliance on the public sector, significant numbers of households experience intergenerational poverty, which brings its own disadvantages, and those who are often far removed from work readiness, and we've many more who are far removed from work readiness and from the labour market. Although overall employment levels here in Northern Ireland are probably on a par with most parts of Britain and slightly above or slightly below the average of at a European level, we have a much larger share of people who are in a position of long-term unemployment, in other words, out of the labour market for more than 12 months, and again, some of that has already been rehearsed. Economic inactivity is also a feature of the local economy here, with a large portion of women in this position. People who have been unemployed for some time and those who are economically inactive often experience significant barriers to re-entering the labour market and do require additional help to do this. Youth unemployment, and again we've heard about this, is at significantly higher rates here than the general unemployed population. And we are also afflicted with the number of graduates who are employed for more than 6 months continuing to increase, and that's a particular difficulty as well. And the number of young people who are not in education, employment and training is also a major issue. These young people then have few or no qualifications and face specific barriers to re-engagement with education, training and employment. To conclude, I suppose, my remarks, there is a need for targeted intervention to support disadvantaged groups, in particular people with disabilities, people with health conditions, young people, lone parents, ex-offenders, older workers, and particularly women, and particularly also people with low or no qualifications. It is only by addressing and targeting these resources that we will create and increase their ability to enter employment, and that helps address poverty and improve social inclusion.
I was just looking at one of the tweets there, Marie. Almost 250,000 people in Northern Ireland living in absolute poverty. That's a substantial proportion of our population, given that we're, 1.7, 1.8 million.
Yep.
So that's about 6 or 7, a seventh of our population.
A seventh of our population.
Are living like that.
And an indictment, I would have to say. And I'm going to make a comment from a purely personal perspective and from my work environment in Gingerbread. The number of people that are approaching our advice service at the moment, whom we are having to refer to food banks in the 21st century in what is classed as a first world country, is, in my opinion, atrocious. It's an indictment.
Many of the people who come through your door, do you think they'll be voting on the 22nd of May?
Actually, I think they will, and I'll tell you what, Aaron's comments earlier were what give me room for optimism.
Yeah, he's done that.
Even though people that we work with and represent are disappointed in how the political forum is reacting to them, they are still optimistic enough to want to go out and vote and have their say, at least.
So what is the question that you would like to be throwing at our panel here?
I suppose I've been giving this some thought, and how, given that Northern Ireland is continuing to face recession, we are unlikely to come out of recession in any real sense very quickly. We're probably looking into further public expenditure cuts and further austerity. How can you, using your position in Europe, help to improve and address the issues around poverty and social inclusion here in Northern Ireland?
Thank you. Ross Bryan, I'm going to give you first voice on this one.
Thank you. Well, I think, first of all, addressing the issue of austerity is crucial, because this is being collective imposition of austerity at a European level is the fundamental problem with what we have, and this is what's creating the fact that 25% of all Europeans are actually at risk of poverty or social exclusion. In terms of Europe, we want to see a much more social Europe, and we want to address the issues of inequality, because that's fundamentally what it's all about. I mean, we have a situation now in the world where 85 people own the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of the world's population, and that needs to be challenged. That is completely wrong, and this is.
It may be wrong, but it's reality.
It's reality, but it can be challenged. And this is the problem is that we have followed a free market approach to our economy, and this is the core problem. I mean,
is that a problem? Sorry, is the free market a problem?
Well, if we read out a quote here, neoliberal political economy creates a social order which not only makes greed good, insecurity necessary, and risk both individual and natural, but also scarcity ever present amidst affluence and plenty. Now, what needs to be challenged is the deregulation and the free market that's just been allowed, the tax avoidance, tax evasion. This needs to be challenged. And in terms of Europe, as I say, what we want to bring in is a social Europe. Get rid of these zero-hour contracts that bring in the living wage. And it's unfortunate that the Assembly actually had the opportunity to bring in the living wage, and there was a Green Party initiative to bring in the living wage through public procurement, and only the SDLP and Sinn Féin supported that, so it's very unfortunate. But again, we need to talk about our priorities that the Assembly has as well. A priority to cut corporation tax.
We're talking Europe here now.
Well, I know, but this whole issue of race to the bottom tax competition, this needs to be addressed at a European level, and actually to go forward and cut the corporation tax is madness. And it's just to pick up on one very final point, this idea that we have an over-reliance on the public sector is just that. It's an ideology, it's an idea. I don't agree with that. We have the same percentage of people in this country working in the public sector as they do in Sweden. So it's an ideology that's been repeated and repeated and repeated, and again, it needs to be challenged.
Mickey Brady, Sinn Féin's a socialist party.
Yes. First of all, Paul, I would say from a personal point of view, I have been an advice worker and an MLA and working with people on benefits, particularly for almost 40 years. 40 years this year, actually. Obviously, I was very young when I started. But in terms of how people are affected, the levels of poverty here in the north, and indeed across Europe, but particularly here in the north, are unacceptable. And we talk about fuel poverty as if it was in some isolation from poverty. People are in fuel poverty because there is poverty. They don't have enough to live on. There was a report out before Christmas last year, and it said that in Britain, disposable income, that's after everything's paid, was £161 per household. Here in the north, it was 57, almost a third of disposable income. That's the difficulty we're up against. And certainly austerity measures. I mean, Europe makes great statements about poverty and social exclusion, but then goes forward to introduce austerity measures which increase poverty. 1 in 4 children in Europe is in poverty. And I think those stark illustrations... So
what would Martina Anderson be doing?
Well, one of the things, obviously, she's very much involved with European Anti-Poverty Network in promoting the fact that there should be social inclusion, because anti-poverty measures and social inclusion should be a priority for the EU. And as far as Martina is concerned, that is what she is pursuing. Because the reality, and you did talk about reality, the reality of all of this is that people on a daily basis are going more and more into poverty. We talk about the need for food banks. And I saw a tweet up there that and again, historically, we have higher rates of disability here in the north, and that people are woefully unrepresented. Well, as a person who has been representing people for a long, long time, both as a political representative, as a community representative, I would dispute that argument. And Sinn Féin as a party, I think most people would accept that we represent people very well and to the best of our ability, particularly those who are socially excluded. And we are a socialist party, and we continue to put that argument forward.
Alex Atwood, you'd like to get the SDLP voice back into Europe. What would you be saying in defence of people like Marie Kavanagh?
So the first thing is that, as I said earlier, the right and centre right have prevailed in Europe over the last number of years, and that there is an opportunity in the next 2 weeks and in the years thereafter to go back to jobs and growth and away from austerity. But what would that look like? The first thing is that we have to recognise that Marie's figures, if you probe into them and into the figures around child poverty, are even worse. 50,000 children in the north live in absolute poverty or more. 100,000 live in relative poverty. On the OFM-DFM website, Paul, there is a report from January, just this January, from the Institute of Physical Studies that says that relative poverty, absolute poverty for children in Northern Ireland within a very short space of time is going to be 30% of our children. 30%. So what is the answer to all of that? 3 examples. One, the work guarantee that would see for people 4 months after they come out of training or education would have a guarantee of a job. That would help those who are in poverty. Secondly, a financial transaction tax, which everybody talks about. But when you actually work it through, if you had a financial transaction tax of 0.01% on all financial transactions, not just movement of bank monies, but investment shares and all the rest of it, it would create a fund globally of 1% of notional gross domestic product around the world. How could that money be deployed in the interest of those most in need? And thirdly, just to bring it back home for a moment, after this election, if we don't measure up very quickly, we're going to crash into a difficult summer. We need to have negotiations not just on Haas, not just on the National Crime Agency, not just on all the unresolved issues of Good Friday Agreement politics. We have a new negotiation on welfare, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I'll finish here, has said that the next phase of cuts are 25 billion, of which 12 billion will be welfare. Now, are we going to get a grip with what London is trying to impose in terms of welfare reform and welfare cuts? Are we going to have a serious negotiation, or are we just going to sell the pass?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Stephen, does your party sit is it part of this centre-right problem in Europe?
I don't see it as a problem. Certainly,
it's been blamed as such.
Those on the left or far left have a certain political ideology that they want to create. Whether or not that encourages more investment, encourages more income generation across Europe, or whether or not it drives that investment away, is a challenge that they have one view, and I certainly would have a different view. I think in terms of addressing the issue and the issue with poverty, I think the bigger challenge is recognising that currently we spend an awful lot of our money on addressing the consequences of poverty. I mean, my background is working in community health development, and one of the biggest social determinants of health is poverty. And we invest most of our budget into health services, which are actually dealing with the outworkings of people growing up in poor areas with poor food, with poor opportunities.
Now, think Europe.
Well, thinking in Europe, the challenge is how do you switch the spend to individual countries, to Europe in general, from dealing with the consequences of poverty to actually investing in people at an earlier stage and an earlier programme.
Okay.
And that will be a massive change, a massive challenge for politicians at a local level, because you have a choice. You can either spend the money on children in poverty now, or you can spend 10 times the amount on your health service whenever those children grow up with medical problems which need to be addressed. The sensible thing is to invest now in early intervention.
Right.
That's the challenge. It won't matter what Europe decides to do if local politicians can't get their heads around
Okay.
the need to switch that investment.
Tina, is NI21 a centre-right party?
Well, we'd like to get to the stage where we can actually talk left-right politics, but actually in the 21st century what you'll find is the politics is less easily identified by simply left and right-wing parties, because issues in themselves are taken by parties now in quite different ways. So it's very hard, if we even look across the UK, most parties are actually quite centrist now, in the 21st century. But what I would like to quickly say before I make my point on Europe is that isn't it lovely to see the love-in between DUP and Sinn Féin when we criticise them, but we don't see a love-in when we No, I'm sorry, we do not see a love-in when we're talking about poverty of our children. I would love to see that joined up thinking, that togetherness when we maybe criticise you as a government, but we don't see it when we're talking about the 50,000 kids are starving. I mean, come on. And I'm sorry, Paul, but I'm bloody passionate about it. That's one thing. Now, if we're talking about how to get people out of poverty, we look at Europe, let's look at our education system. It is in the 20th century. You look across mainland Europe and at the countries, we have, and this will also help with our divided society actually, so we tick two boxes here. Across Europe, we see a lot of free academies, free schools happening, where parents are getting more involved, and we see skills-based schools developing at the ages of 14. Children go into schools that are based on science and technology. If they're interested in the arts, they can go to schools on the arts. And if we create more schools like that in and around Northern Ireland, we'll be getting kids to choose the school because they're interested. Aaron, you might go to, at age 14, go to a school that's focused on IT, technology and science. If you had the opportunity. And then we open up those schools around the areas, less based on religion and more based on the skills that we need for the 21st century. So that in itself, if we could take that lesson from Europe, and if I could bring that back, I would.
Thank you very much indeed. People know where to put their number one.
Certainly hope.
In that case, whether it's you or whether it's with Diane Dodds. Nelson McCausland. Right, centre right?
I think the issue of poverty and how you address poverty is important, and the best way to address poverty, we believe in the DUP, is to encourage people and assist people to get into employment. The road into employment.
But if the jobs aren't there?
Indeed. That's why this actually ties back to one of the early questions about employment. And I emphasise again the 2 points I made then. It's about creating employment and also improving employability. In terms of creating employment, at the moment we invest or put into Europe for everyone in Northern Ireland. It's about 1.58 pounds that we put in, we get a pound back. Now we should be doing more to get back money from Europe into Northern Ireland. And I would have to say there in that regard, Diane has been quite effective in that regard and would lobby very strongly on the range of things. The opportunities are there, whether it's Peace 4, Interreg, Horizon, the European Social Fund, all of those. We need to be looking to see what we can bring in, particularly to support, and the point was made by someone earlier, not just about foreign direct investment, that's important, it has a place to play, but it's the small and medium enterprise, the SMEs, where probably there are a better range of opportunities for employment. So it's a case of assisting supporting the commercial, industrial, economic sector to increase employment, and then also at the same time helping people into employment through employability. And finally, for those who fall through the net, we do need a support system, we do need a welfare system. And in fairness, and I said here NICVA because we work closely with NICVA in this regard, the work around improving benefit uptake is hugely important, because there are many people in Northern Ireland who have benefits to which they're entitled but which they're not claiming. So working in collaboration with the voluntary community sector, and particularly the advice element of that, hugely important.
Okay. Anna Lowe, is Alliance sort of centre-left?
I would be very much, yes.
Centre-left.
Alliance would be centre-left. Socialist, liberals, yes. But I don't always agree with Nelson.
However,
right. But I do believe he's right that I think the best way to get people out of poverty is to get them into employment.
If you've got the jobs.
If you have the jobs, but we have seen a large section of our community here, particularly the Protestant young people, with the decline in our manufacturing industries like shipping, textile, where traditionally they used to leave school at 14 with very little qualification and they would get a job in the shipyard. But that's all gone. What we need to do is move Northern Ireland into a knowledge-based economy. We have seen now the creation.
Yes, that's where people like Aaron want to go.
The creative arts and all that. That's what we should invest. But Europe can help. Nelson mentioned Horizon. Horizon is the next tranche of competitive funding worth 80 billion euros. 80 billion euros. And that's where we can get help to upskill our young people, to help us in research and development. We have 3 wonderful universities at Queen's and EU, including Open University. I always want to mention.
So Stephen Farry will be able to access this money for us, will he?
We should be able to access that, build our skill base up, and we need to do more innovation. Recently in Carrickfergus, Strider, a company is going to create something like 250 jobs, and that's something that they have developed, and that is measuring tyre pressure. And there's a new piece of legislation or regulation coming from Europe to say now all new cars must have that new tyre monitoring gadget.
And where is it being manufactured? Yes, and where is it produced? Right here.
So that's the thing that we need to concentrate ourselves on.
Okay, right. It's 12:20. I'm conscious that I want to keep as much time as I can. So in that case, what I want to do now is to move on to the last of the topics, which is Northern Ireland in Europe, which is what today has really been all about, Seamus. So I'm going to let you say what you have to say, and then I'll finally get a quick comment on your hopes, aspirations for the new Europe post 22nd of May. Seamus.
Thank you, Paul. And as Paul says, we want to focus on the last area of Northern Ireland in Europe. So our role and the role of our MEPs in the European Union itself. I suppose the first thing to recognise is that we currently live in the European Union, what about the 4th iteration of the term, and that we started off with a common market. We then had a European Economic Community, a European Community, and now the name changed to the European Union. Common market itself came out of the European Coal and Steel Community. And the 2 big underlying themes that have been there in Europe and in the development of this union, the 2 big underlying themes was, one, the prevention of further war in Europe. And if you consider that Europe had been the epicentre of 2 world wars in the 20th century, you had a commitment from people who were saying, we want to prevent the possibility of this happening again. The second was the realisation that the world was changing, and you had very large economic blocs, mainly the United States and Japan, hadn't even seen the emergence of China in terms of where it now stands, if you think about the size and scale of the Chinese economy. But Europeans were beginning to recognise that as individual countries, they were going to be very small in this new economic world. So banding together became one of the underlying themes. Eventually we joined that common market. We joined what became the European Union. And back in the 1990s we talked a lot about structural funds. The new structural funds that were brought in then within the European Union were to try and deal with some of the structural issues that existed in terms of Northern Ireland was seen as a peripheral area. We're out on the extreme edge of the European Union. Much higher unemployment than areas that were at the centre. And that affected a whole lot of other areas as well. So structural funds started to look at how they could level the playing field, increase the opportunities in these places. And particularly voluntary and community organisations engaged with particularly the European Social Fund, which was working very much with those people who are furthest removed from the labour market, and we still do that today. Many organisations are still involved in that today. Obviously there was ERDF, the European Regional Development Fund, and other funds as well, and we have engaged in that. But sometimes people think that's all the European Union is to us. You know, it's a cash cow, a place that you can get money to deal with some of these things. Now, from our sector's point of view, even at the peak with the first peace programme, a programme that delivered 500 million extra euro to Northern Ireland to fund that peace programme. It actually contributed about 11% of the income to voluntary and community organisations here. And a few years back that had dropped to about 2%. the general view was that Northern Ireland was awash with European cash and that Europe floated everything here. And I would say that's not the case. Structural funds are very, very important, but they are small. So what we really want to think about is what is the role of Northern Ireland in Europe? And we have 3 MEPs. Are we going to be at the centre of the really big debate, the policy developments that take place, the things that will shape the lives and futures of our families, of people here in Northern Ireland and right across the European Union, and our relationship, obviously, with the rest of the world? Or are we going to sit on the periphery, and will we be a peripheral voice? So what I'd really like to hear from our political parties and our candidates is, how do they think we can influence big European policy development? How can we be at that debate? And I know for some parties their view will be it's better to be in than out, and others have a view that it's better to be out than in. But we are in the European Union, and the big thing is, how do we influence that? How do we make the changes? And what would their candidates deliver on that front for Northern Ireland?
Thank you very much indeed, Seamus. So I suppose it's the last question to you as a group of individuals before we break. How can we ensure that the voice of Northern Ireland as a region is heard when it is different to the UK interest? Alex.
About this time last week, Paul, there was another hustings up at Stormont. There were 50 17, 18-year-old people there. And there was it was one of these interactive hustings, and they could vote during the course of the hustings, and 2 big things came out of it. One, which Aaron might appreciate or not, and that was that 30% of those there, were 50 people, said that their long-term future was away from Northern Ireland. And I thought that what a withering indictment for all the hope and ambition and change that we've achieved. Look where we are now. But the other statistic that stood out was that when they voted about whether they were for or against withdrawal from the Union, 49 of the 50 said they want to stay in Europe. And I find that enormously reassuring because, to answer Seamus's question, there are some people who are in a headlong rush to referendum and withdrawal. And we need to warn ourselves and send out a message as best we can, including in the election on May 22, that for Northern Ireland, withdrawal from the Union would be devastating to our citizens and our communities, to our farmers, to our exporters. So let's be strongly for reform, but unambiguously for Europe. So what's the answer to your question? One,
briefly, please, Alex.
So 3 things. The Socialist Group, it's going to be the biggest group in the European Parliament, up to 30% of members. The President of the European Parliament at the moment, Martin Schulz, was here last week launching our manifesto because he recognises that the voice of the North is important in Europe. And he's going to be our candidate for presidency of the European Commission because under reform, the Parliament has a role in that. So that puts us, to answer Seamus's question, being a member of that group puts us back in the heart of Europe and at the heart of policy making. Secondly, and everybody now talks about this, but I remember 6 and 9 months ago talking about the fact that our drawdown of the big R&D fund, FP7, was less than 5% of Dublin. Dublin's ambition for the next R&D fund, Horizon 2020, their drawdown over the next 6 years is anticipated to be €1.4 billion. It'll actually be closer to 2. Our ambition in the North is £100 million. We are not punching to our weight when it comes to the drawdown of those funds. And the third, very briefly, and Mary and everybody in this room will understand this, bring it all back home. The Minister of Finance and Personnel should direct that the bean counters in DFP who impose business plans upon Peace 4 funding, that should be stopped and sorted out now in order to get Peace 4 monies back into the hands of the great community and voluntary sector in the North of Ireland.
All right. Anna Lou, your closing words.
Yes. Well, I certainly agree. We haven't been active enough in Europe, and we need to do more. We need to. Well, when you look at the 2 top, the top civil servants this time around and the previous time, they both came from Dublin, the highest civil servant in the EU. and we don't have enough people in the EU to be active, to be playing a very active role to sell Northern Ireland. We had the Barroso task force in the last few years. President Barroso came here and talked to us and set up that group, and there is an interdepartmental group here in Northern Ireland. We still haven't done enough. We need to do more. And I think a number of issues we can really sell ourselves. In terms of development of renewable energy, we haven't touched this tiniest bit of our potential. Europe needs us. If we can produce more and more, there's a report, WWF report produced 2 years ago, to say that renewable energy potential in Northern Ireland, the potential is massive. Not only supplying enough renewable energy for ourselves, but we can sell to Europe. Plenty of it to sell to Europe. I think we need to be doing more networking, develop what we are best, like agri-food, and those exporting to Europe. I think we can do a lot more.
I would love to be able to put some of the points that have been raised this morning to Henry Kelly of UKIP.
Henry Riley.
But unfortunately, Henry Riley, I beg your pardon. Henry Kelly is somebody else, isn't he? Henry Riley. Yeah. But I'm still waiting for Henry to respond. Yeah. Okay, I'll put that then to the Conservative candidate, Mark Brotherston. Right. Okay. So, how can we ensure that the voice of Northern Ireland as a region is heard when it is different to the UK interest? Mickey Brady.
First of all, at the outset, I would say, Paul, I've been accused of many things in my life. Having a love-in with the DUP hasn't been one of them to date. So I just want to put that on record.
Are you denying it, or you encourage it?
We have our moments. I'm sure Nancy would agree. I wouldn't exactly describe it as a love-in. Seamus has said, how can we influence big European policy? Well, the first thing is by being there. Now, I'm here to represent Martina, who is a sitting MEP, and I am very confident will continue to be a sitting MEP. And just some of the issues in relation to what Martina has done. She has made the access to European Union funding for various groups a priority since she became an MEP. She has highlighted the opportunities to hundreds of local community groups and businesses she has met. Being part of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left group and in the Parliament has given us the opportunity to deeply engage with NGOs on a variety of issues. She has been pushing for an enhanced engagement from the Assembly and the range of funds available will continue to do so. She has taken lots of delegations and visitor groups, LGBT, SMEs, older people, sports groups, victims of collusion, etc., out to the European Parliament as part of her initiative in bringing Europe to you and bringing you to Europe. So she's been very active. I've actually sat at a meeting with her when she met somebody who's engaged in the area of palliative care, and I have to say in half an hour that woman got more information than she probably got the previous year, and actually said it to me afterwards. So she's very much involved, is very much representing the North while she is in Europe and indeed Ireland as a whole, but certainly does a very, very good and effective job as an MEP.
And how will the DUP ensure that the Northern Ireland voice is heard?
Well, I think the pleasing thing from my viewpoint was recently when independently it was recognised that Diane Dodds was the hardest working MEP from Northern Ireland. I personally seen that firsthand. I believe to be the case, but I was glad to see that it was confirmed independently. And you need a hard-working presence there on a permanent basis. So that's the first priority. Someone who will be dedicated, devoted, hard-working, and give 100%. Second thing is then that they go there with the right agenda. And the agenda that we're taking into Europe, as we've had previously, is standing up for Northern Ireland, making sure that the interests of Northern Ireland are expressed and promoted at every opportunity on all of the key issues. We believe that Europe has a hugely inflated, bloated bureaucracy that's costing every person in every country in Europe. This simple thing of having to operate between Brussels and Strasbourg and having buildings that are locked up for maybe 300 days a year because there's nothing to be done there, that's just madness. But it's that sort of bloated bureaucracy, I think, that does create a bad impression of Europe. And finally, we believe that there's a need for reform of Europe and then also a need for, ultimately, a referendum on Europe.
Ross Brown.
Okay, well, the first thing to say is that as a party, we have 48 members in the European Parliament. We've put together already a common manifesto, and I was on the group that actually helped to draft that, so I hope already we've had some influence in European policies. But to say that this is Northern Ireland versus the rest of Europe, or to divide Europe into states, I think is the wrong approach, because this is not what this election is about. This election is about between those who want to take Europe in the direction of the free market and the deregulation, and those who want to challenge the corporate agenda that has dominated Europe for the last Parliament and the Parliament before. And I think it's a real mistake and a real shame that we're seeing a retreat into nationalism, and because fundamentally we can't deal with the problems such as climate change, such as nuclear weapon proliferation, such as overfishing. They require a coordinated approach, and that's what we need Europe for.
But all politics is local.
It is, and that's one of our principles is decision making at the lowest effective level. So we don't want to see everything decided at Europe. We want to see decisions within the communities. But what we do fundamentally believe in is the principle of international democratic decision making structure. And if I can just say, we are deeply unhappy with the direction that Europe has taken, as I've already explained. But one of the things to finish with is that we fundamentally feel that the economy in Europe needs to serve the people rather than the people serving the economy, and that's what needs to change. And if I can say very, very lastly, the biggest challenge I think that we face in the next European Parliament, and it hasn't even been mentioned here today, which is surprising, is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Agreement, which is currently being negotiated. And this is a free trade agreement between the EU and the US, and that threatens all the social, environmental and food standards, hard-won, that have been achieved in Europe. And I think this is going to be perhaps the biggest issue over the next European Parliament. I encourage everybody to go and find out about it and make your minds up on how you think, because we are very concerned and we're going to oppose that.
This is Jim Nicholson's 6th European election. He is the longest serving of our MEPs. So should he be back there after the 22nd of May, A, he must be doing something right, but B, has he been a voice for Northern Ireland within Europe?
He certainly has been a voice for Northern Ireland. Just want to pick up on the tweet there in terms of Diane Dodd's hardest working MEP and the number of questions she submits on average. I think it's interesting that people should know that Diane's asked about 150 questions in the last 6 months at an average cost of €1,000 a question. So that's €150,000 on getting to number one based on one criteria.
And if you look at the stats, most of them were in the last 6 weeks.
There's a lot of measures of activity, but it takes experience to know what activity is actually delivering for the people in Northern Ireland. In terms of what needs to be done, Jim's very clear. Northern Ireland locally needs to develop a department of the economy where all of the key interactions on the economy with Europe can be focused. The Northern Ireland Executive needs to engage with the MEPs, not on the basis of DUP ministers talking to a DUP MEP and only briefing them, or Sinn Féin ministers talking to Sinn Féin MEP and only talking to them. Whenever Alex was Minister of the Environment, he wrote one letter to Jim Nicholson. As an Environment Minister, he had the responsibility for many of the actions which come through Europe. We need to get our act together.
Okay.
People like Jim Nicholson can open doors in Europe and make the case for Northern Ireland because they've been there, they know people, they've delivered, they have built the relationships.
Right.
Northern Ireland can't work on the basis of spin or quick points to camera, flying out to Brussels, getting a photograph and flying back. The Northern Ireland Executive needs to work in Europe and work with the people who we have in Europe.
Okay. Tina McKenzie, giving you the last word.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I think we have to be careful of a lot of spin, and I love the Green Party and I love Ross, but even he's spinning here. If you look at the statistics, actually, Europe is not some big capitalist society. It's a social market economy. 7% of the world's population and around 22% of GDP in the world and 50% social expenditure. So Europe actually, let's not wipe out all the good work that's been done. It's actually a pretty good social market economy, although it needs reform and improvement. Now, Seamus, you make a really good point. In the darkest hours of war in Europe, 7 years after when they created the coal and steel agreement, really it was about a common vision and how to get Europe out of this conflict situation. In 1998 in Northern Ireland, we made a big step forward and we were very brave as a nation to do that as well. What we have failed to do and where we need to take a lesson from Europe is that we need to stand up. We need leadership. We need people to start voting again. There's so much apathy out there. They say that only 30% 90% of people are going to vote this time. We need people to come out and vote and show that it's time for reform in Northern Ireland. It's hard, but we need that leadership, and we need to make... There were 7 to 9 major treaties since 1952. Europe has continued to change and change. Northern Ireland, there is not the reform because there's not the leadership, and I call on all of the people of Northern Ireland to come out this time and vote and tell this government what you think of them, because we want to move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. OK, well, ladies and gentlemen, could I ask please for your appreciation for our candidates and party representatives? Tina McKenzie, Stephen Nicholl, Ross Brown, Nelson McCausland, Nicky Brady, Anna Lowe, Alex Atwood. I'm sorry that the TUV were not here, nor the Conservatives, nor UKIP. There will be many opinion polls between now and the 22nd of May, but there is only one that will count, and that's the one on the 22nd of May. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. And thank you, panel.